But for me, for example, I was seeing a reporter on Twitter X reacting to a live shot by Nancy Mace, the Republican congresswoman from South Carolina. And she was just saying hot garbage about Trump and the Epstein files. And it was just absurd stuff. Now, to me, to some people, that would be a perfectly reasonable thing to put that person on the air. To me, the stuff she says is outlandish and ridiculous. I don't see any benefit to an audience of putting her on the air. To be honest, I don't see much benefit to putting most things that Donald Trump says on the air, because most of the things he says are untrue, and not just a little bit untrue, but completely untrue. So it's a hard situation if you're covering the president's crazy and nonsensical and living and detached from reality. So, to some degree, you put him on to illustrate those qualities. But in terms of, what we think of as a journalistic exchange where you're sincerely trying to get an answer and they're sincerely trying to answer, and maybe you see things differently. This is not that situation. And it is easier for somebody who's watched it for a long time, as I have, to say that directly than it is for younger people. 100%. And the backdrop for all this, as you're indicating, is the financial squeeze on all these news organizations. And that's irrespective of the political squeeze. Set aside polarization and all that. There is a long-term secular decline in the market share driven by the digital revolution for both newspapers and television stations. I mean, they're going down rapidly. Let's say you're running CNN. Your ratings are falling very fast. What do you do about that? Where do you put the brakes on the decline or get new viewers? It may be logical to say that, well, if we appeal to people who we disagree with politically, or who they disagree with us politically, maybe if we're a little more welcoming to them, we can get more viewers. I think that's a losing game. I don't think it works, but that's a reasonable internal conversation for a news manager to have. I don't think any of it's going to matter because cords are being cut. And, I have 3 grown daughters. None of them subscribe to cable TV.
Yeah.
None of them get a newspaper. They get their news in other ways. And that's true of a whole lot of people. And that's a business fact that is very daunting. And when you layer the political pressures on top of it, it's a bleak moment for the news business. The flip side is people are better educated than they've ever been before. People actually have more information available to them than they ever have before, but they don't invest trust in a small number of large outlets. They get bits and pieces from friends and peers and family members and TikTok and Facebook and fragments flying around all over the place. That's unfortunate for those of us who grew up in a system where we had more influence. I had less influence every day of my journalism career than my dad had coming up in the 60s and 70s. The Washington Post was one of a handful of nationally respected outlets. And when he wrote something that was a significant story, that affected not just what other newspapers did, but what television networks did. It had a lot of clout. And at the beginning of my career, an earlier portion of my career when I was with the Wall Street Journal, let's say, or with CNBC when I moved to television in the mid-2000s, I had some level of influence by virtue of the audience that I had. But that's just continued to decline over the course of my career. And, by the end of it, when, CNN took me off the air because they wanted to have less harsh criticism of Trump, it didn't bother me all that much because I was getting a little bit disenchanted with the ability of cable television to have an impact anyway. What difference did it make that I was saying what I said on television? That's just a reality. And in this independent world, certainly it's less, but that's at least a place where people can plant little seedlings and hope they grow and get big.